Ian MacLeod is joining us from One Properties, and they're working on the development that's going on at Queen and Parliament Street on the southeast corner. So Ian, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thanks Aaron. Good evening everybody, and thank you very much Aaron for the invite. We're always really happy to get out in front of the community and talk about our proposals. It gives, although this format's not the same as sitting around a table, I'd like to make it as much as we can like sitting around a table. Feel free to jump in, fire your questions, I'll try to answer them, or leave it to the end. My name again is Ian MacLeod. I'm SVP of Development at One Properties. I'm responsible for this project and 3 other projects that we have in Toronto. Most notably, one of the other projects is at Queen and Sherbourne, and that is the project that's on the south side of Queen that runs from Ontario Street down to Richmond and almost all the way to Sherbourne, which was recently approved in principle for 1.5 million square feet, 3 buildings, a park, and of course, you know, a huge part of this neighborhood. And we also have a project at Church and Wellesley, which is at the northwest corner of that intersection, extremely important intersection in that community. We have a project in the Kingsway, which is a challenging neighborhood to work in because there's such an established character and a strong feeling of you know, wanting to protect the character of that neighborhood. Which brings me to Queen and Parliament. One Properties view of Queen and Parliament is not dissimilar to the other projects. It is an incredibly important intersection, prominent, important in the sense that there's a mix of character areas, which I'll describe in a moment, and trying to respect what's there now, the character of Queen Street, the neighborhoods that surround it, and the impacts on the neighborhoods, impact on heritage, and being a part of the fabric and contributing to it going forward. These are all things that I want to try and address as I speak to you. I will call up my presentation. And I will say again, my colleague Michael Shavinsky is on as well. We'll take notes if you have questions. I'm a developer. I'm not an architect. I'm not a professional planner. Therefore, I can't answer everything. I'm good at trying to answer everything, but if I can't answer your questions, I'll definitely get answers from the pros. So if I may. Now, can everybody see the Queen and Parliament presentation?
Yep, looks good.
You got it? Okay, good. Typically, we would have our architect participate or a planner, but I thought in this format that having the developer in front of you would be best. So Kurt Core, our architect, put this presentation together, but I'm going to speak to it. I think everybody knows the site very well. Southeast corner of Queen and Parliament. It is the vast majority of the entire block. So it includes everything on that block except for the Shell station at the south end. And I'll speak about Shell in a moment. Just an aerial shot to give a different perspective on it. With just really starting to give some context to the neighborhood, perhaps not the most comprehensive view of the neighborhood, but when we look to, for planning context, but also architectural expression and sort of inspiration, I suppose, for the project, you know, we've just thrown up some imagery here, which, you know, you're all very familiar with. 339 Queen across the street. St. Paul's Basilica, which is a very important part of this community and something that we've tried to respect in the design. And then just some renderings of and photographs of recently approved projects to give a sense of the emerging built form in this neighborhood, which tends to be not a pure tower form. It's more of these are tall buildings for the most part, but it's more of a built form that respects the neighborhood. So typically there's a base to the building, and then there's a tower element above. The towers in the King Parliament neighborhood, and I say King Parliament because of the planning references to King Parliament, the tower components tend to have a larger floor plate. In the distillery, we do see more of a traditional tall building form, but some of these other buildings show that taller, or excuse me, larger floor plate. On this, the intent is to just show some of the existing built form conditions, which are, there's, a smattering of taller buildings, and then this emerging form, as I say, of some traditional tall buildings, and then the larger slab forms, which allows a developer in the community to avoid tall buildings, but it achieves the density targets that the province and the city have generally placed on the neighborhood. I'll step back for a moment. One Properties acquired this site in mid-2017. Shortly thereafter, in early 2018, we made our first submission for an official plan amendment and a rezoning. At that time, we had applied, and that's not reflected on the screen in front of you right now, but at that time, we had applied for a 29-story building that, while the height was the same, the GFA was about 20% greater than what we're applying for now. We've amended the application. I'll speak to that in a moment. Our original application had a public park, which sits at the southwest corner of Queen and Power. And largely the built form that we originally contemplated is reflected in the current application, except that we've done several moves to lighten up the application. So with that, what I'll do is I'll just speak. I'm not going to speak to the planning policy because I don't think we want to get dragged down into that too much. But generally speaking, the King Parliament plan puts this site into two policy areas. There's a Queen Street policy area, which is really the frontage along Queen, and is intended to reflect that heritage street front, three-story, very established built form, very pedestrian friendly. There's a tremendous amount of heritage assets and resources along Queen. And then the area about the 2/3 of the south site and south is in the, I think it's the Jarvis Parliament or Regeneration area. And this is where density is intended to be put. The impacts are clearly off of Queen Street. The impacts are off of some of the neighborhoods which are to the north. And that's both visual and shadow impacts. So this, Queen and Parliament sits at this interesting juncture in the neighborhood where there's a different, there's Corktown, there's the Moss Park elements, there's the gateway element to the Queen and Parliament intersection, sort of that prominence. So there's a number of things that we've tried to balance and consider as we've designed this site. I think the most important thing, or one of the most important things to talk about in what you see before you, which is our revised proposal, is that at the corner, we've enlarged the park from our original application such that our entire parkland requirement is satisfied on site. Most developments in the city, as you likely know, pay cash in lieu rather than dedicating park on site. Because this site is relatively large, the city had identified it as a priority to take the park rather than take the cash, to which we were happy to participate. This is a 500 square meter park that has been deliberately oriented to face onto St. Paul's Basilica and the bulk of that structure, the heritage structure here. And that was in consultation with the church. From our original, I'll speak to the base of the building. So from our original application, we reduced the base or the podium of the building from 6 stories down to 3. And that 3-story element really is, we try to reflect that through the vast majority of the site. But most importantly, along the Queen Street frontage, so that this element is a 3-story element that reflects the existing character of the neighborhood. We've also brought that 3-story element down Parliament. And again, that's down from the original 6 stories. The tower component, this 29-story element, has very intentionally been pushed down off of Queen into the middle of the block. And that is to pay respect to the fact that visually, the impact of a 29-story tower, while sometimes we look at these things from aerial perspectives or bird's eye perspectives, the intent here really is from a street level that what this really does is it puts people up into the building, into a portion of the site where there's just not the same impact. The idea is they come downstairs and then flow out into the street and then onto Queen Street to support the businesses and put people out, but as has been used in other parts of the city, you put those people in a tower sort of tucked away, I guess is the best way to put it. We have one driveway, and that driveway is off of power. So the entire project relies on this one entry point. That is a deliberate move to take off any driveways from Queen, which is really is a non-starter, but more importantly, to take it off of Parliament. We originally had a drive-through off of Parliament through onto Power. So we've eliminated that entirely. That also takes all loading and delivery activities and puts it internally into the building, and it's hidden and can't be seen. The ground floor is made up of, most of it is made up of retail. And then the second floor is intended to be a grocer that, again, we wouldn't necessarily want to have a grocer on the ground floor, but what it does is it brings people into the project, brings them upstairs, and then draws people into all of the other businesses that are on the ground floor. There are, as you can see here, so there's the bulk of the mass is in the tower, but there are 2 real elements to create some stepping down and visual interest and terracing in the building. I don't think this is the ground floor. And again, here's the driveway off of Power Street with the internal delivery and loading. The park with retail that can face into that park and support that animation and activity on the park. We intend on doing smaller retail units. That's why we're showing these like ringing or around the perimeter of the building. And then as you can see in here, and we certainly don't want to talk about this, but this is really back of house and support for the functioning of the building. Again, tucked away from the street. The second floor intended to be a supermarket. And then we start to get into some of the residential units. There are 8 rental replacement units in this building, which are fully accommodated in the proposed new building. And just as a side comment, we often get asked this question, but One Properties is typically, or very typically, in the building, or the business rather, of building rental buildings. Our business model is to build rental. It's not to build condo. Often what happens in these projects is we don't declare whether it's going to be rental or condo until we break ground. But every intention is to build rental here. And there's actually growing support for new rental construction in the city of Toronto. As we go up the tower, this is where we get into more of the typical floor plates. We don't need to talk about this too much. I think it's notable to tell you that we are happy to honor the requirement to build 3-bedroom units, and we're proposing 10% 3-bedroom units in this project. Couple renderings, and I do hesitate. You know, these are renderings at the zoning level, so we haven't got to site plan. We haven't started talking about materials and the specific look of the building. We are always open to hearing the community's ideas on how to animate the ground floor, how to articulate the upper tower, and take that feedback to make sure that we're respecting, you know, the needs of the community and how the community views this. So here you can see that 3-story element and how it relates to Queen Street. You can see the park and how this creates that space along Queen Street rather than looming over the street with a tall tower. These renderings sometimes, again, this is taken from an aerial or almost like a bird's eye view, and it doesn't give you that street sense and that street feel that I think is most important with these projects. It's the way we view them as pedestrians and people and citizens of the city. There's another shot. It's a slightly different impression of the architecture and the way the park is articulated. This park would be subject to community input on the design. As a developer, we're responsible for delivering the base of the park, and then we work with the community to deliver the design, which is not our design. We would assist in that, but ultimately the approval of that design is in the city's hands with the community's input. So I'm going to just take it off the share. Next steps, and just to let you know where we are. Our view, I'll be frank, I mean, our view on the height of the project in particular differed from the city's. As I say, we're at 29 stories. We felt it's appropriate for a site of this size. The floor space index is well within, actually below that of many of the other projects in the neighborhood. So we really feel that the impacts have been mitigated through this design, and because of the park and the driveway and the way we've respected Queen, we've achieved a lot of the goals of the city and hopefully the community on this. So notwithstanding that we have an LPAT appeal, we've been working towards starting a mediated process with the city. We're working with Shell Canada, who own the site to the south of us. They're a party to the appeal. And St. Paul's Basilica is a party to the hearing as well. But as we understand it, they're quite content with the design. They just want to be at the table in case any changes are made. So that formal mediation process hasn't been booked. Unfortunately, with scheduling things these days, it's a little bit difficult. But I would expect this fall that we'll be able to achieve that. The full hearing, which we'd like to avoid, but the full hearing is scheduled for January, January 25th. So I apologize if I buzzed through that very quickly. I'd be very, very happy to answer any questions or take any comments from the group.
Thanks, Ian. We actually have a number of questions in the chat. I've got one real quickly for you because a number of developers have talked about bringing a grocery store to Corktown. Can we get that in writing?
Can you get in writing that we will put in a grocery store? And I assume that's because you want one?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
It's been a point of a lot of community feedback that we've had over a number of years. Okay,
interesting. Well, I can tell you this. The second floor is designed, I think it's about 30,000 square feet of retail. we have every intent of filling that space, which is designed specifically for a grocer, with a national grocer. The way the world sometimes evolves, unfortunately, is that we have to adapt. As if our competitor across the street puts in a grocery store, then we have to go to our potential tenants and have that discussion with them. But I can certainly tell you that it's been designed for that. And I can tell you that we've had a strong interest from, there's one group in particular that wants to be here. I didn't mention the Ontario line. I did hear Adam talk about this, but that is a game changer for the neighborhood and for drawing a national grocer. If there is a station near here, at one time the planned track was actually to pass under the site. I think that's changed since, but just the same, there'd be high appeal for that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, I'm sure many folks here will be closely looking at that. So we have a number of questions. I'll just start from the top. And one of these is about the setback on Queen Street, so as not to hide the church tower view from downtown Toronto. What does that look like in the design?
So we didn't do any renderings, but the part of the intent of opening up the Queen Street frontage with that park was to create that visual, like that, the opening up to see the church from a larger area along Queen. And that was a very deliberate move that we were asked to consider. There's a vista or viewpoint that's protected by doing that. I can only really show that to you by through renderings, which I don't have. But that was a very important part of our discussions with the city.
Mm-hmm. We'd gladly make that available on our website whenever we can.
Okay. Yeah.
The second question I've got is the park at Queen and Power. Does that mean there's no Section 37 monies being paid to the city?
Two parts to that. The first part is no, that does not mean that there's no Section 37. Parkland is treated as something separate from Section 37. It is a requirement in every development in the city, whether it's done through cash in lieu or on-site dedication. Section 37 it can contribute to parks. It can allow the developer to do upgrades or provide more than what's required. But Section 37 would almost certainly be part of any discussion, and that would be a discussion, of course, with the councillor about what's important to the community. The second part to that is the Planning Act is now changing, and the structure of how parkland, so Section 37 under the changes to the Planning Act has been eliminated. Now there's a community benefit calculation. So the municipality must come up with a list of requirements for the community and then go to the developers with more of a predictable community benefit payment. That legislation is evolving, but we've always said to the city that we'll give the park and then we'll have Section 37 discussions, however the new legislation shakes out, basically.
Thank you for that answer. One of the other questions, you touched on this, but maybe you can expand on it a little bit, about the intention of who will be living in the residential building. Is it mixed social supportive housing, rental, condo purchase? You mentioned that there's going to be a rental component. Can you add a little more detail to that?
Yeah, okay, so rental replacement is only 8 units, but that is any tenants that are on site have the right to move back into the new development should they choose to at the rents that they're currently at. Sometimes rental replacement can be a significant portion of the development, but in our case, I mean, 8 units is not, is a relatively small component. But our intent is to do purpose-built rental so that it is rental in perpetuity. As a function of that, it does have it has a different character, I suppose, than a condominium that may be owned by a group of or a large number of investors. What purpose-built rental does in general is because it's institutional ownership with one group who has control over the entire building, decisions can be made sort of, I think it's fair to say, with more of an eye to a long-term view for the building. Now, of course, we can't control the types of tenants, and we can't, only to a certain extent can we have, influence the type of people that are in the building, just based on who can afford it. We have not spoken about an affordable component to this project. That would likely be part of Section 37 discussions. But, we view this as it's a high quality project. We have an institutional eye to these things where it's a long-term ownership. So ensuring that we have the type of tenancy that reflects that is very important. I hope that answers the question. I know, it's a question that we often get is, who's going to live in these buildings? And that's, it's largely market driven. But we do have a view that purpose-built rental provides there's a higher purpose, really. We're in the business to make money, but rental serves a higher purpose for the city. It's a city that desperately needs rental, in my view.
Mm-hmm. Here's a quick, easy one. How many units are going to be in the building?
Got that number. I apologize. I've got stats all over the place. Just under 500, so 486.
Thank you. A question about the shoppers. Do you know if it's when they're leaving, when they're vacating, and do you know if they're relocating nearby?
No, Shoppers has a lease that extends for several years. So, we've had lots of discussions with Shoppers about possibly coming back into the project. We certainly would like to retain them one way or the other. But there's no plan on them being closed. Their lease allows them to stay for quite some time.
Mm-hmm. This is, you might not be able to answer this one broadly, but I think you could answer it as far as the construction hoarding and like building of the structure goes. There's a lot of boarded up storefronts on Queen Street. Could the boards be covered in artwork to improve the streetscape until the buildings are removed? What do you think? Yes,
we can. And we have done that, particularly at Church and Wellesley. If you happen to pass that site, you'll see that we have art installations in one of the buildings. They're displayed, in a protected area. And then we've also done wall art, both in the laneway and then along some of the hoarding that we have there. We absolutely can do that. And I'm glad that was raised, because that, in the past, I've had programs where we had one as simple as the police approached us, said we had a blank wall, and asked if we could have a group of youth come out and, with somebody who could train them on site, put up graffiti art that worked out fantastic. So those kinds of things, whether it's that program or something else, we absolutely can do.
Excellent. Yeah, we've seen a lot of developers utilizing that type of program in local communities, especially around Regent Park, to great beautification of a construction site.
Right. I'm sorry, Aaron, we can do that now, just to be clear, and we can do that while it's under construction as well.
Yeah, I think that was probably the intent of the question.
Yeah.
As well. Let's see. This is about the rendering that you showed. I guess the question is, could you help with the perspective relative to the existing buildings? Does the park go on top of where the Shoppers is located?
Here, I'll call up the shared screen again. Just a moment. Okay, so if you can see that perspective and that rendering, the park, so Shoppers actually sits, this is the, where, I hope you can see my hand. That's the corner of Queen and Parliament, where the Shoppers sits now. So the street running along here, that's Power. St. Paul's is here. It's just not showing on here, but it is there. And so no, the park actually sits at the other end of the block. Let me see if that might be a better perspective. So again, Shoppers sits right here.
And one of the other questions that was just after this one is about the actual park itself. I think you kind of touched on this, but that's just a kind of a placeholder rendering for now, right?
That's right. Now, we've gone through a few of these park processes where, again, our responsibility as the developer is to deliver this in base park, which just basically means we provide, in theory, we provide a sodded park. What happens in reality is we work with the community and the city park department to come up with a design that, again, as the developer, we don't have any control over. We assist in that process, and the final approval is with the city. So this is meant to be a placeholder. Often considerations are hard surfaces versus soft, child play facilities versus, passive parks. Those are all things that we'd be working with the community on as we move forward.
Great, thanks. The next question is, has there been any work or discussions with Great Gulf or the city about regards to traffic studies coming off of the Richmond Street off-ramp?
Off Richmond Street. So we haven't had direct contact with Great Gulf in that regard. In our transportation studies, we're obligated to, our engineers are obligated to consider all of the existing developments proposed, and in their case, it's going to be coming on stream. So I can't give you specific answers, unfortunately, but that has been incorporated into our transportation studies, which are still with the city. We've got some comments with them, but we will continue to have to work with them. One comment in that regard is a huge contributor to the parking to the traffic rather is the amount of parking that we have in our project. We envision this project as not having a lot of parking and not generating a lot of traffic. We believe, and I think the city would generally support, a low parking ratio in this because of the proximity of the streetcar, the Ontario line, and the ability to walk to the core. So I think, and I don't want to misquote, but our proposal for parking is probably in the neighborhood of, our ratio is probably 0.25, which is relatively low.
Thank you. Just to go back to the actual park itself, Cindy is asking, will the park be conveyed to the city?
Yes, it is something that we are obligated to convey to the city early on in the process. And again, we as a developer are responsible for delivering it in a certain condition, but title to the park is entirely with the city.
Okay. And how many bicycle spaces?
Yes.
How many bike
I think I said we have 486 units, residential units, but we've got, in terms of bike spaces, we've got over 500. I've got the precise number, but I know it's over 500. So we've got more than one per one, more than one bike space per unit.
Cool. That's great, especially with so many people joining the bike force this year.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, we've got one last question. I think it's a good one to end on. How soon do you think there will be shovels in the ground, both here and at Sherbourne and Queen?
So I'll talk about Queen and Parliament first. So regardless of how things go with the city, we will have our hearing in January, whether it's a settlement hearing or if it's a contested hearing. And then we need to go through the site plan process. On this application, I think it's possible that we would be submitting for site plan at or around the time of the hearing. That way we can hopefully deal with site plan and zoning issues at the same time. But the site plan process nevertheless can take up to a year, and then we've got to pull building permits. So all that being said, I'd be very happy if we were in the ground in 18 months, but that's an aggressive, optimistic developer view of things. So it's still some time away. Queen and Parliament, we have our zoning in principle approved by the LPAT and supported by the city. We're working through our site plan applications. Those could be submitted. We'd like to submit those second half of this year. So again, even similarly, in that case, I suppose we would, I think the earliest we would be in the ground would be 12, 18 months, but that's an optimistic view.
And that's for Queen and Sherbourne, or?
That's Queen and Sherbourne, correct, yeah. And then there, at Queen and Sherbourne, there are 3 separate buildings that can be phased depending on, how things might evolve in the market.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us today, Ian. Certainly happy to pass on any of that further information on our website and social media.
Yeah.
And, yeah, thanks for taking the time today and to answer everyone's questions. And I think we're all excited to have that grocery store on the second floor.
Okay, duly noted. All right. Thanks very much, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for joining, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, my pleasure. Take care.